What if the fatigue you've been calling life is not exhaustion at all, but an ancient signal that something sacred has been misplaced? That the dissonance you feel in crowded rooms or after ordinary conversations is not your weakness, but your compass, pointing you back to a truth too vast for language. Somewhere along the way, you were taught to ignore the subtle, to trust only what you can see, prove, or measure. But beneath that conditioning, there is a current, a quiet rhythm older than memory itself. And if you found your way here, it's not by accident. A deeper part of you, perhaps one you've barely heard, has been guiding you back. This video isn't information, it's invocation. A reactivation of something buried beneath years of noise and performance. A soft knocking on the door of your inner archive where ancient knowing still lives. You didn't stumble into this. You answered a call. One that has echoed in dreams, lingered in moments of stillness, and whispered beneath every time you felt like you didn't belong in the world as it is. So before we begin, take a breath. Not a shallow inhale, but a descent into your body, into this moment. Exhale the noise, the story, the armor, and open. Because what we are about to uncover is not just a truth to understand. It is a memory waiting to be remembered. They never raise their voice. They never insult you. They might even bring you tea, ask about your day, and tell you they love you. But every time you leave their presence, something in you feels subtly altered, drained, disoriented, like you forgot what you were thinking before you met them. You tell yourself they didn't do anything wrong, and yet you no longer feel like yourself. This isn't about malice, it's about magnetics. There are people who survive by tuning into someone else's current. They're not trying to harm you. They're just hungry for regulation. They lean into your calm, your clarity, your strength, and without conscious awareness, they start syncing their nervous system to yours, like someone warming their hands near your fire without ever bringing their own wood. They're often the people we're taught not to question. The parent who sacrificed everything, the friend who's always there, the partner who just loves too deeply. But when presence becomes a subtle pressure, when affection leaves you empty, you are not in a relationship. You are in an extraction loop. You begin to notice the signs only in hindsight. You feel responsible for their emotional balance, like you're their lighthouse in every storm. You begin censoring your joy, your insight, your growth, afraid it will overwhelm or alienate them. You leave conversations feeling foggy, but can't point to anything cruel or unkind. You start carrying emotions that aren't yours, guilt, sadness, worry that seem to appear without cause. That's the hallmark of energetic inversion. When someone doesn't take from you aggressively, but so passively that you start offering parts of yourself without knowing why. This isn't just emotional labor. It's auric dislocation. Your energy being siphoned not through conflict, but through closeness. It's easy to overlook because these people rarely do anything. And that's what makes it more dangerous. Their needs are implicit. Their wounds speak louder than their words. And in your desire to be kind, you begin abandoning the architecture of your own boundaries. But here's the deeper truth no one tells you. Compassion without discernment isn't healing. It's self-erasure. The energetic ecosystem you've cultivated is sacred. If someone leaves you consistently lighter, more aligned, more whole, they're adding to your field. If you feel scrambled, depleted, scattered, they're tuning into your signal without your permission. Energetic vampires aren't evil, but they are untrained in self-resourcing. And until they learn, they will unconsciously use the strongest frequency in the room to stabilize themselves. If you are that frequency, and you don't know how to shield it, you'll become their anchor and their exhaustion all at once. This is not an invitation to hate them. It's a call to return to yourself. You are not here to be a battery for other people's avoidance of their own healing. You are not cruel for needing space. You are not heartless for protecting your frequency. Some of the most dangerous energetic dynamics are wrapped in care, silence, and familiarity. But your body knows. Your nervous system always knows. The question is, are you willing to trust it before you're forced to? Sometimes the connection feels instant, magnetic, as if you finally found someone vibrating on your exact wavelength. The way they look at you, speak to you, mirror your thoughts, it's uncanny. You feel seen, known, recognized. You let your guard down, not realizing that something else is unfolding beneath the surface. An energetic distortion wrapped in perfect timing. This is what happens when imitation masquerades as intimacy. Not all resonance is real. Some people don't meet you where you are. They mimic where you're standing, long enough to be invited inside. In the language of energy, this is called synthetic resonance. It's a phenomenon where someone senses your frequency, not to harmonize with it, but to reflect it back to you just enough to bypass your filters. Their goal isn't connection, it's access. The intensity you feel in these fast bonding relationships isn't always truth. It's sometimes speed. And speed, when untethered from discernment, can become a trickster. These connections flare brightly, burn hot, then leave you unsure of what was real and what was just reflected. This isn't about blame. It's about understanding how easily perception can be bent when it meets unmet longing. When you crave recognition, it's easy to confuse imitation for resonance. When you long to be mirrored, you may not notice that the other person is reflecting only what they think you want to see. Energetic hijacking rarely feels violent. It often feels euphoric. That's what makes it dangerous. You begin to shift your language to match theirs. You abandon your own pace to keep up with the rhythm they set. You question your truth because their mirror seems so sure. And slowly your center of gravity moves, not because they pushed it, but because you leaned in too far, too fast. In a real resonance, you don't feel watched, you feel witnessed. You don't feel swept, you feel held. You don't lose your direction, you sharpen it. But with synthetic resonance, there's always a slippage, a quiet dissonance behind the synchronization, a feeling that something's slightly off, even if everything looks right. It's important to remember, just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's aligned. Sometimes, what feels magnetic is simply what your nervous system recognizes as a repeated pattern, not what your spirit actually needs. This is where clarity begins, not in judgment but in pause, not in retreat but in recalibration. Ask yourself, is this connection expanding my frequency or mimicking it? Am I being met or mirrored? When you start to tune into that difference, the illusion collapses, and what's left is your truest resonance, quiet, grounded, unmistakable. Healing words are meant to liberate us. But what happens when they're used to silence, confuse, or control? What happens when phrases like "just surrender," "you're projecting," or "go with the flow" are not invitations to awareness, but weapons to disarm your intuition? This is the subtle violence of spiritual bypassing disguised as wisdom. It doesn't yell. It doesn't threaten. It gently invalidates you in the language of peace. You say something doesn't feel right, and you're told you're resisting divine timing. You set a boundary, and they say you're not embodying unconditional love. You express anger, and they call it shadow work you haven't integrated. What you're experiencing isn't guidance, it's gaslighting with incense. This is how spiritual language gets weaponized, not through content but context. The words are familiar, the delivery is calm, but the effect is always the same. You begin to doubt your own reality, your own frequency, your own right to say no. At the core of this manipulation is a subtle message. If you were more evolved, this wouldn't bother you. So you try harder to transcend instead of protect. You spiritualize your trauma instead of confronting the source. And you become spiritually polite while your soul quietly bleeds. But healing isn't bypassing discomfort. It's honoring the signal beneath it. If something feels off, trust that. If a teaching invalidates your experience, it's not wisdom, it's a mask. Here's how to recognize spiritual manipulation wrapped in nice words. You feel worse after the advice, but can't explain why. You begin to monitor your tone, emotions, or even thoughts around them. Your boundaries get dismissed as ego, and your needs labeled attachments. There's always a moral high ground, and they're always standing on it. Now, how do you respond without losing your own center? You don't need to argue. You don't need to convert them. You need to stay sovereign in your truth. Try this. Thank you for your perspective. I'm choosing to honor what my nervous system is telling me. Or I understand your view. I just don't share it, and that's okay. Or simply silence. That too is a complete sentence. Toxic spirituality thrives in environments where people fear being seen as unevolved. But true consciousness never requires submission. It doesn't punish dissent. It holds space for contrast, complexity, and boundaries. Remember, sacred language used without respect for your inner truth is just poetic control. You're not hard to love. You're just starting to hear the frequency of your own clarity again. And no one, no matter how enlightened they sound, has the right to dim that signal. In a world that moves faster than feeling, sensitivity is often mistaken for fragility. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if the ones who feel deeply aren't weak? They're carrying the last echoes of a wisdom this world has forgotten. If you're someone who absorbs energy, picks up unspoken tension, cries without a clear reason, or feels off when entering a room, it's not a flaw. You're not broken. You're energetically porous. You live with your antennas fully extended, even when no one taught you how to filter what comes through. This sensitivity is not your burden, it's your compass. But like any compass, it needs calibration. Because without conscious awareness, your open field becomes an invitation to every wandering frequency, especially the ones that can't generate their own light. That's how manipulation enters the empath's life, not through force, but through resonance. You feel their pain before they speak it. You sense their chaos before they act it out. You offer your peace as a bandage, your insight as a balm. And slowly, you become the place where their unprocessed emotions go to rest. This is why unchecked kindness becomes fertile ground for covert harm. When you believe it's your job to absorb everyone's suffering, you lose the ability to detect when you're being slowly siphoned. It doesn't mean stop caring. It means start discerning. So how do you anchor yourself in your own field again? Try this energy awareness practice, simple but potent. Sit in stillness, spine upright. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, where does my energy end and the world begin? Don't rush to answer, just listen. Imagine your field as a bubble expanding from your heart, not defensive but defined. Scan your body for any holes, places that feel open, tired, or buzzing. Gently breathe into those spaces. Whisper, I call all parts of my energy back to me with love and clarity. Do this often, especially after intense conversations or environments. You'll begin to notice how much of your exhaustion was never truly yours. Being highly sensitive in this age is an act of quiet courage. It means you still hear truth through the noise. But courage doesn't mean self-sacrifice. It means knowing what you carry and choosing to protect it, not from fear but from reverence. Your capacity to feel is a sacred inheritance. Let it guide you, not bleed you. Because the world doesn't need more hardened hearts. It needs more awakened ones who have finally learned how to feel without disappearing. You can't see it, you can't touch it, but you feel it shift every time someone enters a room with heavy energy, speaks words laced with resentment, or silently judges you from across the table. That is your aura, your energetic ecosystem, the living atmosphere of your being. Think of your aura like a forest canopy, unseen to the average eye but vital to your survival. It filters what enters, what exits, what lingers. And just like any living environment, it can be polluted, punctured, or drained if not protected. When your aura is intact, you feel steady, even in chaos. You know what's yours and what is. When it's breached, you feel foggy, easily triggered, or emotionally exhausted for no clear reason. Most aura intrusions don't happen through physical harm. They happen through emotional resonance and energetic permission. A harsh word, an intense glare, a manipulative compliment. All these can slip through unnoticed if your field is open without boundaries. Here are subtle signs your aura has been compromised. You suddenly feel off after a seemingly casual interaction. Your thoughts become scattered or overly fixated on someone else's emotions. You have a hard time grounding or finishing your own sentences. You experience unexpected fatigue, anxiety, or emotional instability after certain spaces or people. These breaches don't make you weak, they make you sensitive. And sensitivity, when paired with awareness, becomes your greatest protection. To begin healing and sealing your aura, try this simple energy hygiene ritual. Stand with bare feet if possible. Take 3 deep breaths into your belly. Close your eyes and imagine a soft golden mist enveloping your entire body, 6 inches beyond your skin. Whisper with intention, what is not mine, I now release. What is mine, I now call back. Visualize any dark or stagnant energy dissolving into light, returning to source. End with the affirmation, "My field is sovereign, my energy is whole." Do this after emotionally heavy conversations, public spaces, or moments of self-doubt. It's not superstition, it's subtle maintenance of your spiritual body. Your aura is the space between you and the world. It's how your spirit breathes. And like any sacred place, it deserves to be honored, cleansed, and defended, not with fear, but with reverence. Because just as you nourish your body, your energy must also be fed, protected, and occasionally rescued from the hands that reach for it without asking. Not all agreements are written on paper. Some are etched in energy, sealed in silence, and carried within you for years without ever being questioned. These are energetic contracts, unspoken deals your soul signed long before your mind could understand what was happening. They're formed in moments of need. I'll keep the peace so they don't leave. I'll absorb their pain so they'll love me. I'll stay small so others don't feel threatened. They're not logical, they're not even conscious, but they shape everything: your choices, your voice, your capacity to evolve. An energetic contract is any unspoken role you accepted to maintain connection, avoid rejection, or feel safe. And while some were survival tools, most become cages once the lesson is complete. The danger: these contracts don't expire on their own. You have to choose to end them. And that requires one thing: clarity. Ask yourself, do I feel an obligation to stay in this dynamic, even if it no longer serves me? Am I operating from guilt, loyalty, or fear, not genuine alignment? Do I shrink, perform, or self-edit around certain people to maintain a familiar role? Is the relationship surviving only because I keep sacrificing something invisible? If the answer is yes, you're not bad. You're just entangled. And it's time to disentangle, not through blame, but through sovereignty. Here's a practice to begin releasing outdated energetic contracts. Sit in stillness. Breathe deeply. Bring to mind a person or pattern that feels heavy, stale, or out of alignment. Place one hand on your heart, the other on your solar plexus. Say inwardly or aloud, I release any energetic agreements between us that no longer serve our growth. I return to my field. I reclaim my frequency. I let love remain, but I withdraw the contract. Breathe, feel the shift. You don't need drama, only clarity and commitment. You'll know a contract has been broken not by the reaction of the other person, but by your own internal stillness. The guilt fades, the obligation lifts. Your energy begins to return home. You're not abandoning them, you're honoring yourself. Because contracts made from fear can never hold the same weight as choices made in truth. And your frequency, clear, whole, untangled, is the only signature you ever truly owe the world. You've cut the cord. You've ended the relationship. You've deleted the number, stopped responding, left the space. But something in you still doesn't feel free. You still dream about them. You still hear their voice in your head when you make decisions. You still carry a subtle weight that doesn't belong to you anymore. That's the mark of energetic residue, the subtle injury that remains long after physical separation. Leaving a relationship isn't just a behavioral act, it's an energetic unbraiding. And for highly sensitive or spiritually attuned people, the real healing begins after you leave. Why? Because while you exited the dynamic, parts of your belief system, built during that connection, are still operating quietly in the background. Beliefs like, I'm hard to love. If I set boundaries, I'll be abandoned. My value depends on how useful I am. These aren't just thoughts. They're structural energy patterns embedded in your aura, reinforced over time. Until you consciously dismantle them, they continue to shape your inner world, even in the absence of the person who helped install them. This is why you can still feel stuck even when the relationship is technically over. You left the room, but part of your energy is still sitting at that table. So how do you fully leave, not just physically, but energetically? You begin the process of inner unbuilding. This is not just healing, it's conscious demolition. It's the spiritual act of removing old scaffolding so your field can expand again. Here's a guided approach to start. Acknowledge the structure. Sit in quiet and name the emotional architecture still lingering. I still feel like I have to prove I'm worthy. Don't judge it, witness it, trace it back. Ask, when did I first feel this in the relationship? What moment made me believe this was true? Let your body answer, not your logic. Unbuild it with love. Place your hand on your heart and say, this belief helped me survive, but I no longer need it to feel safe. I release it with gratitude and reclaim the space it occupied. Fill the gap intentionally. Breathe deeply and imagine golden light filling the void where that belief once lived. Whisper, I am safe in my own truth. I am whole on my own frequency. Repeat during triggers. Every time the old wound whispers, repeat the dismantling process, calmly, consistently, compassionately. Energetic healing is not linear, it's layered. But each layer you peel back reveals more of your original self, unconditioned, untangled, undistorted. You don't need to forget the relationship. You just need to stop living as if it still defines your field. Because your freedom isn't in the leaving. It's in the reclaiming of every frequency you once gave away without knowing. You're not your passing moods. You're not your worst day or even your brightest one. Beneath the turbulence of emotion lies something far more stable, more ancient, your core frequency. It's not what you feel. It's what you are when everything else goes quiet. But here's the catch. Most people don't live from that place. We live from reaction, habit, inherited conditioning. And over time, especially when immersed in toxic environments, we begin to mistake our adaptations for our essence. This is how you lose your original frequency, not through trauma alone, but through prolonged energetic blending. You start laughing when you don't find things funny. You say, I'm fine, when your gut is screaming otherwise. You become fluent in the language of survival, but silent in the language of self. Because frequency isn't a mood. It's the signature of your soul. It's how you exist when nothing is asking you to perform. So what happens when you spend too long disconnected from that signal? You feel fragmented, not broken, just scattered. Like pieces of yourself live in too many places at once. And every time you try to center, the noise of who others need you to be drowns out the quiet truth of who you are. To return to your original frequency, you don't need to add anything. You need to remove what isn't yours. Here's a grounding meditation to begin that reconnection. Sit or lie down in a quiet space. Let your body settle. Imagine a dimmer switch in your mind, turning down the noise of every external influence, one notch at a time. Whisper inwardly, if I weren't trying to be understood, liked, or needed, what would remain? Feel into the answer. Let it arise without force. Breathe into your solar plexus. Visualize a golden thread descending from the cosmos into your belly. That's your unchanging frequency. Hold it gently. Practice this often, not to become someone new, but to remember who you've always been beneath the static. Because the world doesn't just need your opinions. It needs your vibration, undiluted, unperformed, unmistakably you. And when you begin to live from that place, everything false, no matter how familiar, begins to fall away. Some dynamics don't want resolution. They want reaction, because reaction is fuel, attention, emotion, energy. And the more you offer it, the more the system survives. This is the hidden engine of reaction feeding, the mechanism by which your triggers become currency for manipulation. When someone pushes your buttons and you fire back, it doesn't just validate their power, it anchors your energy into their field. You're no longer sovereign, you're synced. Their chaos becomes your state. It's easy to think silence is passivity, but in truth, when practiced consciously, silence is energetic sovereignty. It's the ultimate power move, not because it withholds, but because it unplugs from the story, from the bait, from the belief that you have to prove, explain, or fix anything to be free. Because you don't. Neutral silence isn't absence, it's presence without participation. It's standing in your field so fully that nothing chaotic can land unless invited. Here, how to spot when a system is feeding on your reaction. You feel an almost irresistible urge to correct, clarify, or justify. The conversation never moves forward, only circles back to old pain. No matter how calm you begin, you end up emotionally destabilized. You're hooked, even when you know better. The invitation isn't to become cold or disconnected. It's to become unavailable for systems that require your distress to remain alive. Practice conscious silence like this. When triggered, pause, feel the heat, but don't move. Ask yourself, is this my truth needing expression, or my wound seeking validation? If it's the latter, breathe. Let it pass. Respond only if it adds clarity to your field, not if it feeds theirs. If unsure, say nothing. The silence itself is a frequency that speaks louder than defense. When you withhold reaction, the manipulative system often escalates at first, like a machine short-circuiting without its usual power source. That's a good sign. You're not losing control, you're disabling the loop. Because in a world addicted to noise, your calm is confrontation. And your silence, when held with awareness, isn't retreat, it's release. From the narrative, from the trap, from the illusion that you owe your peace to anyone who hasn't earned it. Real love is vast, it's forgiving, it's resilient. But love without discernment becomes exposure. And somewhere along the way, many of us learned that to be loving means to always be open. No locks, no limits, no resistance. We were taught that true compassion has no boundaries. That's not love. That's access. And access, when granted without wisdom, becomes a gateway to emotional manipulation. To love someone doesn't mean you owe them proximity. To forgive someone doesn't mean you invite them back in. To be kind doesn't mean you abandon your instincts when something feels wrong. The confusion comes from a false binary. If I set a boundary, I'm being cold. If I walk away, I'm being unspiritual. If I say no, I'm rejecting them. But here's the truth. Compassion with boundaries isn't rejection, it's alignment. It's the mature act of honoring your heart and your field. Let's break it down. Empathy with discernment is healthy compassion. Empathy without limits becomes emotional self-abandonment. Forgiveness with space is love. Forgiveness with unchecked access is complicity. Many manipulators rely on your kindness. They know the words: heart, healing, oneness, forgiveness. And they use them like keys, hoping one will open the door again. The invitation is to shift your paradigm. You can be soft and still say no. You can be spiritual and still walk away. You can be healing and still protect your frequency. Here's how to set boundaries without defense. Get clear on your energy. What feels expansive? What contracts you? Anchor in your truth. Don't rush to explain. Truth needs no validation. Speak simply, "This doesn't feel aligned for me right now," or "I need space to return to my center." Don't defend the boundary. Let it stand. Anyone who needs a justification for your self-respect is revealing their own misalignment. A locked door doesn't mean hatred. It means you're curating what enters your sacred space. It means you're choosing intentional love over unconditional access. Because real love isn't measured by how much you endure. It's measured by how well you honor your own field, even in the face of longing, pressure, or guilt. Your compassion is holy, but so is your capacity to say with clarity and grace, "I love you, and I love myself enough to step back." We were taught that forgiveness is the highest form of love, but rarely were we taught the second half of that truth. Forgiveness doesn't require proximity. It doesn't mean continuation. It doesn't mean reunion. Sometimes it means blessing someone as they exit your field forever. Forgiveness is a clearing, not a contract. When you forgive, you are not saying, "I want you back in my life." You are saying, "I choose to release the energetic weight this has carried in me." One heals you, the other rebinds you. This is where many get stuck. They think that to heal fully, they must stay in contact. They believe that if they don't reconnect, it wasn't real forgiveness. But here's the truth. Forgiveness is an internal event, not a relational agreement. You can forgive and still walk away. You can release the resentment and still close the door. In fact, trying to maintain connection out of guilt or obligation often reopens the wound instead of sealing it. Why? Because healing and harm operate on different frequencies. And when you stay energetically tied to someone who is still vibrating in the pattern that hurt you, no matter how much you forgive, it keeps you anchored to the past. Forgiveness is about letting go of what happened. Boundaries are about protecting what's next. If someone cannot meet you in the clarity and frequency of your healed state, it's not unloving to let them go. It's honest. Here's a simple yet powerful ritual to practice release with grace. Find a quiet space. Light a candle or simply sit in stillness. Bring the person or pattern to mind. Feel the charge, don't suppress it. Speak inwardly or aloud. I forgive you for not being who I needed. I forgive myself for staying past the point of peace. Visualize a thread connecting you both. Then gently, lovingly imagine cutting it. Whisper, I release you from my field with grace, with truth, with peace. This isn't bitterness. It's not avoidance. It's completion. True forgiveness doesn't ask that you forget or pretend it didn't happen. It asks that you honor what did happen and reclaim your energy from it. Because holding on is not always love. Sometimes letting go is the holiest act of all. You drink water, you shower, you brush your teeth. But when was the last time you cleaned your field, your energetic body, your unseen atmosphere? Just because you can't see energy doesn't mean it doesn't accumulate. And when it does, it doesn't just stay silent, it speaks through your body. Unexplained anxiety, sudden exhaustion, tension headaches, mood swings you can't track to any clear trigger. These are often not random, they're signs of energetic congestion. You absorb more than you realize. The room you just walked into, the unresolved emotions of a friend, the digital noise you scroll past every hour. It all enters, unless you're intentional about what exits. Spiritual hygiene isn't luxury. It's survival in a world that rarely honors subtle space. You don't need incense and moonlight to begin. You need consistency, presence, and permission to reset. Here are 3 simple rituals to help you cleanse your energy daily. 1. The water seal. Use with showers or hand washing. As water touches your skin, say, everything that is not mine, wash away. Visualize the water carrying stress, static, and stuck energy down the drain. Let the act of cleansing your body also become a ritual for cleansing your field. 2. The light sweep. Use any time during the day. Close your eyes. Imagine a soft white or golden light flowing from the crown of your head down to your feet. See it collecting and neutralizing heavy energy like dust being swept away. End with the phrase, I return to center, I return to truth. 3. The breath anchor. Use when overwhelmed. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4. Repeat 5 times. With each exhale, imagine releasing energy that isn't yours. With each inhale, reclaim your own clarity and strength. This isn't about control, it's about return. Returning to yourself, to stillness, to sovereignty. In a culture obsessed with productivity, energy care is often dismissed as indulgent. But for the spiritually sensitive, the empathic, the attuned, this is non-negotiable. You wouldn't wear the same clothes for days without washing them. Don't let your spirit wear layers of other people's noise without cleansing either. Because spiritual hygiene doesn't just help you survive, it helps you remember who you are beneath all the static. And that memory is your deepest medicine. Every interaction is an energetic transaction. You're not just exchanging words, you're exchanging presence, attention, and power. And most forms of manipulation aren't sustainable on their own. They rely on one thing: your ongoing participation. If you stop feeding it, it can't survive. Energy vampires don't just drain you by being present. They drain you because you continue to plug in through reaction, guilt, over-explaining, or even silent resentment. Your energy is the electricity that powers the system. Remove the power source, and the illusion begins to collapse. This is the part they never taught us. You don't have to fight to be free. You don't have to win the argument or expose the manipulation. You simply have to withdraw the current. Stop explaining your boundaries. Stop feeding the loop with outrage or fear. Stop checking if they've changed. The system can't sustain itself without your frequency. And this doesn't mean you shut down emotionally. It means you become selectively available. You choose not to serve what no longer serves your evolution. Try this daily energetic refusal practice to regain sovereignty. Sit in silence. Ground your breath. Feel your energy gathering back into your body. Say inwardly, I no longer feed what distorts my field. I withdraw my presence from anything not rooted in truth. Visualize a soft golden light sealing your aura, gently repelling anything that doesn't resonate with your highest alignment. Return to your day as a clear vessel, not guarded but intentional. This is how the cycle ends, not with confrontation but with clarity, not with noise but with neutral presence. Because silence, when chosen with awareness, isn't passive. It's the most powerful form of energetic refusal. You're not avoiding, you're unavailable. And in that space, your energy stops being the fuel for dysfunction and becomes the source of your own liberation. No one can truly take you from yourself. Not the manipulator, not the story, not even the trauma. They can only create enough noise that you forget what your original frequency feels like. But forgetting is not the same as losing. And remembering doesn't require fixing, it requires listening. You don't need to do more. You don't need more wisdom, more books, more concepts. You need less distortion, less performing, less feeding what never fed you back. Because the truth of who you are isn't a theory, it's a tone. It hums beneath the chaos. It pulses through your intuition. It speaks through your stillness. If you feel called, try this. Spend 3 days disconnected from everything that pulls you out of sync. Social media, certain people, old routines, expectations. Not because these things are inherently bad, but because they've layered noise over your signal. Give yourself space to hear again. Wake up in silence. Touch the earth. Let your breath be the first voice you respond to. You'll notice something strange. The more you subtract, the more whole you feel. The less you explain, the more clear you become. The less you chase resonance outside of you, the more it rises within. Because your frequency was never broken. It was just waiting for you to stop giving it away. So don't try to find yourself in someone else's mirror. Don't look for your worth in places that ask you to dim just to stay. Come back. Your real self was never missing, just momentarily silenced by the noise of survival. Let this be your return.